have such sights to show you. We're Poppin the Scary Horror Podcast here. I'm your host, Coale, and with me as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Aaron. Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Howdy. How about them Aurora Borealis, am I right?
Yeah, this time of year, localized entirely this far south.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, awesome.
I didn't see it where I was, because I'm too city boyed up.
Same. I did not see it either, but even if I wasn't, preoccupied, again, going outside, there's no way I was going to see it with all the city lights, blocking the sky and everything. But yeah, so we're recording this the day right before Mother's Day, and this episode's going to be coming out after Mother's Day.
Mm-hmm.
So with Mother's Day being the nearby holiday and everything, I thought it was a very much an appropriate time to review, in all honesty, one of the most highly regarded horror films of cinema general, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. So not only is this a film that you and I have both seen and everything, but I'm pretty sure we're both feeling the same way going into it of yeah, we're probably going to like it. I don't know when's the last time you've seen it.
It has been long enough that it'll be nice to have a refresher. But I've seen it probably twice. I watched it once in high school, and then I watched it again in I don't know, maybe at least 5 years ago, more. So I don't remember all the details, but I've seen enough Hitchcock films before and since that I think I got we both know what's gonna happen, I guess.
Yes.
No surprises. It's just a refresher for me. But
yes, because I do know a little bit about the history of Psycho itself. This is one of the ones I'm more well versed with. Mm-hmm. Granted, not as much as other films I would say, but I know some of the bullet points and everything else. Yeah. But what is your history with Psycho? Because again, I know horror wasn't naturally your sort of thing you gravitated towards there, so what led you to watching Psycho? Was it just through Hitchcock himself, or is it something else?
A little bit both. Yeah, I think Hitchcock was kind of the exception, because my mom was kind of a Hitchcock fan, a little bit, not super cinemaphile or anything, but we watched some of the classics, and then especially as Psycho's just one of those films that I feel like everybody has to see at some point, whether you're a horror fan or not. It's just such a important pop culture cinema moment. There's just referenced so much. It's just it's something that stood the test of time. It's I feel like everybody, if you care about movies even a little bit, has seen Citizen Kane at some point or something, and it's just it's in that echelon where it's you gotta watch Psycho at some point. You watched movies, if you've never seen Star Wars, I mean, come on, you gotta, come on, everybody's seen Psycho. It's like talking about The Godfather or something. So it's, yeah, it was just one of those things that I was bound to encounter it. But then, in college, we explored some of the, I don't want to say lesser known, because it's not like they're that unknown, Hitchcock movies, Rear Window and Vertigo and those sorts of things. And so that kind of re-sparked my interest in Alfred Hitchcock as a director, and have since gone back and watched, the titles that people recognize but maybe have not dug into. Rear Window, Vertigo, Birds, all that kind of stuff. So I'm a Hitchcock fan overall. I guess that's my history with it. I've never seen all the little obscure ones, but Psycho, definitely. I've checked that one off the list.
Okay, awesome. Man, that is awesome to know the backstory and history you have with Hitchcock and Psycho in general. My experience with him previously is kind of interesting, because I've talked about this a couple of times in long time episodes ago, essentially, that basically, while I did have that sort of attraction to horror as a kid, I was still a scaredy cat and everything, and my parents knew I was very much easily scared and frightened and everything. But I kept wanting to go see films and everything, and so I felt like that kind of put them in a weird dilemma where it's okay, what do you do and everything? Because whenever I was growing up and everything, like 10, 12, around that age, they start showing me a lot more of their favorite childhood films, you know, stuff like, you know, Ghostbusters, Goonies, Back to the Future, stuff like that and everything. But whenever it came to horror and everything, you know, of course, the ones I wanted to watch, I was most certainly never going to watch until I got to an older age, like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street and everything. But they still wanted to meet me in the middle there. So I remember specifically they allowed me to rent Psycho from 1960 because I think even though like technically like the film like film ratings were like weird essentially there because you know at the time obviously this would have been considered very shocking and everything else like that, but by today's standards it's very tame for what I remember. Definitely some shocking scenes to say the least and implied violence. But I guess for them, they felt like this was like the appropriate sort of like scare level there where, you know, it's a lot of tension and everything else. So the first time I watched it, I was like maybe 12, 13, something around there. Like, because I remember specifically renting it on VHS tape or whatever. I wish I could remember exactly what the VHS tape looked like because I remember renting that and House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price. So that was the first time I watched it, and it did stick with me as a kid and everything, but, you know, it's like one of those things that watching it as a kid or whatever, there's just some things that just kind of go over your head, especially because it is, I mean, the film's called Psycho and stuff. It's very psychological and stuff with the antagonist of the film and everything. So I want to say maybe I've rewatched it a second time, but in all honesty, it might have been just like me binging a whole lot of films haphazardly. My experience with Hitchcock is very interesting because I have not seen a lot of his films, admittedly enough there. Like I've been still needing to see Birds, Rear Window. I saw Vertigo once, but I feel like I need to revisit that again, maybe. And then I watched this other film for a film class because I think the challenge was like, you know, watch a Hitchcock film that isn't these main films at all whatsoever. Like I can't think of the name of it. I'm trying to see if I can remember, trying to flip through here.
It's got many films, many a film.
Yes, lots and lots of films. But yeah, so whenever it comes to him, I can respect him. At the same point, though, I don't think that I'm too crazy about it, where I'm just like, oh, what a god of a director, essentially. There, but
you gotta watch Rear Window and you gotta watch The Birds. I think those are the two that I put on your list.
Well, I will definitely put that on the list. I cannot find this film to save my life. So if I think of it, I'll probably tag it in a YouTube video or something. But yeah, I'm pretty sure this is. I think this is one of those films that we just both feel comfortable going in, just being like, yeah, we're going to be fine. It's like I would be absolutely blown away if we walk away from this in all honesty and be like, wow, that film sucked.
Kind of a light too.
Yeah, wow. I thought Leprechaun was bad. Sheesh.
That's a Hitchcock
guy. Yeah. So we're going to check into our motel room and we'll be right back after we hopefully check out alive.
Check it out.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
And we are back from watching Psycho. And Aaron, not that I am expecting any sort of change from how we felt in the intro, but how do you feel after watching Psycho?
Yeah, it was a good movie. I mean, really, it's one of those things where I was like, all right, like the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, I know this is getting an above average score, but I gotta figure out what. You know what I mean? Like the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were some. It was nice to get a refresher because there was definitely some details that I had forgotten about. But overall, I feel like I remembered the intricacies of the plot.
Yeah, I mean, and that's basically the same place I'm coming from. Like, I knew for sure, like, this was not going to get a low score. Like, You know, because again, even though like I just realized while watching the film, I'm like, man, it's honestly been a very long time since I've seen this film.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen so many people talk about Psycho and everything that I felt like I had watched it a lot more recently. But like I said, once I watched it, I was like, okay, yeah, it's been way too long. But I knew that it was going to be a high score, and yeah, it pretty much meshed with me. But I kind of went through the same thing. I'm like, I know I'm going to like the film. The question is, how much am I going to like the film?
Right.
And everything. And it was kind of interesting. It was interesting kind of taking a step back. Not so much like I was watching it and be like, man, I'm going to find everything I hate about this film. But at the same point, I just wanted to really critically look at it and everything. And, you know, I think Psycho is one of those films where there's a lot to enjoy. Like, you know, there's the whole, like, as we've talked about, we're a little bit different with our judging there, where I'm a lot more like, you know, like I even though I can look at a film critically, entertaining is what I tend to favor, whereas you, Aaron, you know, while you can enjoy entertainment, you get more of a high out of critically acclaimed, like just perfection.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think the other thing to take into consideration is just the historical impact this film did have on film. So there is also that third sort of aspect, because I do think Psycho is a very important sort of film. Again, you said it best, like kind of comparing it to Citizen Kane. I would say that this is, you know, just it changed the way that we viewed films and everything else like that. And I think it's going to be interesting because, I mean, I guess we'll do spoilers still, but even though I feel like a majority of people know
the big twist.
Yeah, the big twist of the film and everything else like that. So,
or at least the iconic shower scene, I feel like we can say that.
Yes, definitely. It's like one of those weird things, like, you know, it's just because so much of Psycho has been referenced in modern day culture and everything else like that, and keeps being referred to and everything. Like, I've literally seen them reenact the scene, and like one of the first times I remember seeing it was they reenacted the scene in Looney Tunes Back in Action, that film and everything.
Which shows you how much of a pop culture phenomenon has got to be. I feel like people are still making Psycho references.
They are, and in all honesty, it probably will continue because it is just that culturally strong of a film and everything there. But I mean, this one's going to be interesting to talk about, and I'm sure we'll divulge into different tangents and everything else like that. But I guess just to get the overall story of Psycho straight, it focuses on our leading lady, Janet Leigh, who plays the character Marion Crane, who works for like sort of like real estate bank, something like that,
some sort of real estate company.
Yeah, and while working there, she comes across a whole lot of money and everything, and finding a chance to start life anew and everything, and other factors that do play into it. In a sort of instinct, knee-jerk reaction move, she tries to take the money and run. And while she's running away and everything, she ends up stopping at this motel basically in the middle of nowhere called the Bates Motel. And there she meets a friendly, young, frankly attractive looking guy whose name is Norman, who owns the motel and the house up there. And he's a little attached to his mother, as we find out.
He's a bit of a mama's boy, has a lot of the awkward tendencies that would correlate with that.
But
it seems like a nice fella.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure nothing's gone wrong or nothing like that. But that's sort of like the general plot, and we're just kind of like, it's so weird because it starts with this one plot line that then starts to divulge into another plot line and everything. And in all honesty, I think it's honestly one of those things that, you know, a lot of films are like, you know, oh, they're going to Camp Crystal Lake, bad things happen. And I'm so used to repeating a lot of these plots on the podcast that I feel like I almost kind of say the same thing, just sort of different stuff. This is one that's weird, where it just starts off doing this, and then it ends up kind of divulging into a different sort of plot line and everything. So with, honestly, the plot and everything, it's pretty freaking sound and pretty interesting.
It is. It's also structured really interestingly in ways that I can't really get into specifics until we get into spoilers, but just the way that this story is structured narratively, takes some big risks that are difficult to pull off. As far as like, yeah. Again, I can't really be specific, but it's right now. But I'm happy to, in spoilers, the fact that even the main characters that we follow tend to change. Even the title of the film, Psycho. You're not like, upon a first watch of this movie, it's not actually really clear who's the psycho.
Yes, that is true. That is true and everything, because, like, yeah, like, the motivation of the main character and everything, Marion, it's one of those things that's, like, what she's doing is sort of, like, immoral and everything, literally just taking the money and run, and already, like, one of the reasons why she's doing it is because of her, like, I'm guessing it's, like, secret lover, boyfriend, or something like that.
Yeah, because the first shot is like her all wrapping up a steamy sesh with her secret lover, who's travels a lot for business, lives in a different state, lives in California, and they want to be together, but I mean, this is the 60s, man. You can't just live on your own income as a single woman, and he's kind of in a lot of debt, and they're like, oh, well, this just can't work out. And then she comes across some money, and, well, maybe it can work out. So that's her little secret plot.
Yeah, and so it's kind of interesting seeing her sort of, like, commit to that decision and everything, and as she's sort of running off and everything, there is a lot of tension that starts building up immediately. I mean, it starts building up as soon as she's kind of, like, found out that basically her alibi of, like, well, I'll deposit the money and just go home. I have a headache there. Yeah. But instead, she's seen basically driving out and everything, and her boss sees her there, even though she's supposed to be at home. And that just is what starts the tension of the film immediately, and it just keeps rolling. Yes.
Yeah. There's I mean, like, the cops are kind of after her a little bit, just not because they found her out, but because she's just really suspicious. One finds her when she's parked on the side of the road sleeping there, and he's like, something wrong, miss? And she's like, no, I gotta go really fast.
Yeah. Like, no poker face whatsoever.
And he's like, are you sure nothing's wrong?
Which it is funny and everything, because, like, obviously it's like, it's one of those, like, interesting things where we get to see Marion just be kind of, like, more honest and kind of more relaxed. But as soon as she has the money, she does a good job of having a bad lying face.
Yeah.
Which honestly takes a lot of skill and everything there, because trust me, I've seen some really, really bad sort of acting whenever there's like, oh, you're supposed to look like a bad liar and everything, but then it ends up being bad acting.
Yeah, because it's so funny, because it is funny to think about that these are good actors doing a good job acting as bad actors.
Yes.
You have to pretend you're bad without actually being a bad actor.
Yeah, which honestly...
So you can't be like, what, buddy? Officer?
Yeah, and so... Yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff to be appreciated with sort of, like, the overall storyline that Psycho chooses to take and everything. And honestly, if you've never seen anything about it before and you have no reference or context, it is definitely sort of like a crazy sort of ride you go through and everything.
Yeah, and I will say at this point too that it's aged well. This is a movie from the 60s, but I mean obviously there's something, things of the time where you're like, okay, they're on a payphone now or whatever. But as far as, like, things that wouldn't have aged well as far as understanding the story or the references or anything, it's not like they're like, tossing out 60s references. Even some of the dialogue I feel like would be written today, like the eccentric guy that drops off all that money. He was just like, I need a little drinky poo or whatever.
Yeah. Drinkaroni.
Drinkaroni, that's it.
That Drinkaroni, that's what it was. Oh my gosh, yeah. It really does feel like a very, very open film for audiences and everything, which I think does help a film age very well and everything. It still makes it enjoyable and everything. So I do give props to the plot and everything. Again, I know that Hitchcock based it on a book which was based on an actual true, like, murder and everything. I don't know the finer details of it and everything, but the real life murder wasn't nearly as intricate as the Norman Bates sort of thing, but it was just sort of like a loose inspiration and everything. So I'm not sure how much they evolved from the adaptation and everything of that there. But I mean, as is, like, having no context, it's just a very sound plot line and everything. So it's honestly pretty freaking strong. And I know we've mentioned this already, but let's talk about some of the castmates there. One of them being Janet Leigh, who plays Marion, as I've mentioned previously. Fun fact about her, her daughter is Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh yeah. I knew Jamie Lee Curtis had a famous mama. I forgot that it was her. Yep.
So basically, it's just sort of funny how her mom ended up being in one of the most beloved horror films of all time, and then Jamie Lee ended up being in one of the most beloved horror films of all time, following Halloween and everything. So. I honestly, Janet Leigh does a very good job, as we mentioned before. Like, she literally is very good and believable in how bad she's lying and everything, which is hard. It's really hard to do, because you would think like, oh, I'm a bad liar, therefore I have to be like unbelievable. But then if you go too far, you just end up being a bad actor. So it's definitely sort of like a balance. But yeah, it's one of those things that even though she is doing something sort of crummy, you know, it's like she's trying to do it just so they can have sort of like be together and everything. So it's like understandable. It's not like one of those things of like, oh, this person's awful. Right. But at the same point, it's interesting because you're stuck with this person there, and again, you're kind of like more so in her shoes, and the fact of all the paranoia that's around her, because everybody's like looking at her, staring at her. You just feel the tension, which is amazing, because all the people that are staring at her and stuff aren't really the main antagonists of the film. I mean, they're technically an antagonist to what she's trying to do, but it's not like, you know, they're in the wrong. They're basically just going after her. So whenever it comes to watching her, she honestly does a very good job. I have like zero qualms about it. She's likable enough to where, you know, you want to make sure she's okay and everything else. But at the same point, you are sort of like, okay, well, what are you going to do in this situation?
A lot of the suspense in the early parts of the film is just following this person who's kind of portrayed as a good person who's doing a bad thing, you know, for the right reasons maybe, but like, she's not necessarily in her element. She's not a master criminal. She's making mistakes as she's trying to like kind of get away with this thing she's doing.
No, it's really honestly kind of funny to see how much like fumbling some of the characters do. It obviously is purposeful. It's not like bad writing sort of fumbling. Right. It's just genuinely they're just screwing up really bad.
And a lot of the good stuff is like because she has a good idea and then it gets fumbled. You know what I mean? Yeah. So she's like, let me trade my car, and then she's like, well, I'm doing it right in front of a cop. You know, or like being really suspicious while doing it. You know, just like little things where it's like, well, that might be a good idea to try to cover your tracks, but the fact that she's just like kind of doing this all on the fly and she's really nervous is like the source of the fumbling, and not just, you know, some just complete ineptitude, you know, or something else that would detract from the quality of the film.
Yeah. So in all honesty, I have like zero qualms about it whatsoever there. And I guess we can also talk about the leading man, as it were, even though he only arrives about like after the first third of the film, I would maybe argue. Towards the end of the first third, sort of stuff like that, is Anthony Perkins playing Norman Bates and everything.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, while, you know, other characters do show up and everything, I do feel like he is one that deserves to be talked about heavily.
He is excellent.
Because, like, the interesting thing about the casting is the fact that initially, from what I remember, Hitchcock was not intending on having Anthony Perkins sort of like be the sort of guy they were looking for. They were looking for someone a lot less friendly, attractive looking and everything, because you know, they knew again sort of what they wanted for this character, and they're like, you know, it shouldn't be like sort of like, you know, sort of like attractive, young, friendly looking person there. It should be someone more older, more questionable or anything like that. But whenever Anthony Perkins went to audition and everything, Hitchcock was just like, never mind, this is much, much better.
Yeah.
This is so much better. And it does work because, again, obviously we'll talk more about his character and everything, but he has such a charisma, but it's not like, sort of like, he doesn't have it. I'm trying to think. You've described it before. I can't think of it. It's sort of like the awkward Riz.
I was about to say he's got the tism Riz.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta use the tism to rism, you know what I'm
Well,
saying?
like, no, that's definitely true because he's so awkward, but yet it also works in his favor and everything.
Yeah, like, you can kind of tell, like, everybody's talked to the awkward kid before at school. He's that guy. He maybe doesn't have a lot of friends, maybe a little bit of a mama's boy, maybe developmentally stunted in some ways, but, you know, he's a really nice guy, kind of. There's nothing wrong with him. He's friendly. And you want to like him. You want to like him because he seems like a cute, innocent, like, you know, sure, he's awkward, but then, yeah. So I think it's a great choice for that character, and the way that he is played is, just like, you kind of, there's a part of you that just, like, sympathizes with him, which I think is great for somebody that's sort of set up to be perhaps a villainous character.
Yeah, because it's very interesting because, you know, you look at Norman's situation, he's like basically living at this motel all by himself, all alone and everything.
With
you know,
a mother that nags at him.
Yes, for sure. And so, yeah, and again, you think like, you know, yeah, of course he's going to be awkward. He lives alone with his mother and everything. And, you know, it's not booming business or anything else like that there. And so you're like giving him the benefit of the doubt and everything else like that. But then sometimes he'll just make you question that again and everything as you talk, because again, sometimes he'll just buckle down, like there's almost like sort of triggers, but it's not even like triggers that like shows him like, you know, screaming, doing a violent rage, something that's clearly like, what the hell is this? It's just very minute, sort of just like irks or something.
It's just realistic trigger. Yeah. Just talking to somebody and you could tell you struck a nerve and you're like, oops, I said something, like, and then it gets kind of awkward. Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where, as well, like, even though, like, you know, whenever Marion and Norman would talk and everything with their conversations, it also didn't feel like one of those things where it's like, I'm in a bad situation or something. It's just sort of like, oh, I hit a sore point. I feel bad about that, essentially. And so I think that's what makes it a lot stronger, because I feel like too many films take an opportunity just to really make somebody look antagonistic and everything. So
there's no scenes of him just rubbing his hands together, plotting. Twirling his mustache,
doing that. He's just trying his best.
He's just a guy.
He's just a dude trying his best. And I mean, honestly, this is the film that Anthony Perkins will always be known for and everything, but it's for good reason as well and everything. Like, I recently saw him in the adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express, and, you know, he was like super great there, but it's just like, especially seeing this is like one of his like more recent roles and everything there, because the Murder on the Orient Express, that was like in the 70s, I believe that was adapted, but this is like 60, so he's very young as well and everything. So it's just, and we'll talk more about his character and everything. It's just hard to not spoil too much about like new character developments and everything else that appears there, and because really they're sort of like the main characters that get a lot of focus there, because you know, at the beginning you have people like Sam Loomis, played by Josh Gavin, who is the lover of Marion and everything, but you only see him at that beginning part pretty much for a while until he pops up later in the film. But you know, from what you see, he does have like sort of like he has to give a lot of motivation to Marion, just to, whenever she's confronted with the money, to kind of take the money and run, because he was going on about like owing like alimony to his ex-wife or something like that.
Yeah. He said he's in debt and he owns like a hardware store, so he's not making a lot of money, and all the money he makes goes to his ex-wife basically for alimony.
But you know, and with him, I will say that is sort of the unfortunate thing, because I felt like they were really building on the tension. Marion and Norman, I feel like definitely a lot more of the character sort of building stuff went into there, but it's also kind of focusing on Norman, because it's sort of like, once she arrives at the motel, she's ended up in a whole other plot line and stuff that ends up kind of usurping the one that's going on. But it's not dropped, mind you. It's just put to the wayside there before it reconnects again. So whenever it comes to, sort of characters like Sam Loomis, it is sort of the unfortunate side effect that he's just, he's good motivation for the main character. He's not a bad character. He's played well. He's like he has the riz. He has like the good looks there.
He's the stereotypical handsome guy.
Yeah, swooner, everything else like that. And he does the job well and everything there. And that's sort of like the unfortunate thing about this. Like, half of the characters end up showing halfway through the film after Norman even, and so it's sort of awkward to talk about it, whenever it's looking at all the stuff, because there's like the boss and the coworker and rich Tex man, whatever they're essentially, and they're there. They have some goofs, some gaffes.
Yeah, and they are there to, provide motivation and plot and whatever, but they're not, like, characters that are meant to be developed,
Yeah, so it ends up just being sort of like, okay. Yeah, see, I'm even trying to look at, like, the listings, trying to see who's who and everything. There are other characters
that pop up later, but it's just, it's hard to
yeah,
mention them.
So I would say, like, for the sake of, I don't know, I guess I will try to dance daintily around mentioning some of the characters, but it's literally walking on bubble wrap there, because later on in the film, Marion's sister ends up appearing, Lila Crane.
And she's referenced at the beginning of the film, so it's not like a total surprise.
Yes, for sure, because she was mentioning that she was coming over or whatever to visit her in Tucson, Arizona there, and she's played by Vera Miles, and it is funny because they do look like sisters, even though they obviously aren't related. So casting wise on looks, it's like, oh yeah, they look like they could be related and everything, but that's the unfortunate part with Lila. By the time she finally appears, there's not a lot of film left for development, and again, she just serves as another piece to kind of help the plot along, essentially, just to kind of tell exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I thought she was a good character, though. She was played well. She's sort of headstrong and stubborn and on a mission by that point in the movie, for sure.
Yeah, which I honestly think was just the best call and everything, instead of just her kind of being meandering there and not contributing anything there. Again, just she's literally putting her foot on the gas there to kind of help propel the film forward continually. One of the other people I would mention is whenever the private detective is brought in, Milton Arbogast, played by Martin Balsam, and he's a good detective. He's pretty good. I will say he has the most awkward introduction there, because he's outside of Sam's hardware store whenever he starts asking questions about where exactly Marion ran off to and everything. But like the way the cinematography was, we'll talk about cinematography, I'm sure, and there's definitely some masterful moments with cinematography, but that was one of the awkward things where he's like staring at the window, it's like a close shot, and then he's walking in, but he can't walk all the way forward because the camera's there, and so then he's just standing there and just waiting, and then he has to kind of back up and then go forward, but then he stops because he can't run into the camera, and it was just zoomed in on his face. So that was one of the ones where I was like, that's quite the introduction for the private detective. But I liked him because, we see a lot of private detective characters in film and everything else like that. And while I don't think he's one that I'm like, oh, one of the best, whatever, he does the job well, especially whenever it comes to sort of questioning individuals and stuff, and almost... like, again, it's sort of like, he doesn't even have good cop, bad cop there. He's just sort of like always playing it chill, but then he's not afraid to bring up any contradictions or anything like that.
Right, yeah, he definitely has a good job of being kind of personable and friendly enough, but then you find yourself halfway through the conversation with him, and you're like, wait a minute, he's trying to open me up.
Yes, and so I feel like he was very much believable as the private detective and everything else. It's just, again, I would say really arguably, and everyone knows this, there's just one character in the film that basically gets all of the intricate sort of layering and everything, but it makes sense why this character gets the most development, because it sort of just explains the plot and sort of like the mystery of everything there. And like I mentioned, there are other characters and stuff that we may reference and everything, but for the most part, I would say that's like the main gang and everything else. The only other character that's alluded to, but we never really ever see, is Norman's mother. It's usually sort of like a shadow or just hearing her voice and everything.
Yeah, you hear her, you see her in the windows, you know, but yeah, you'll have to watch the whole movie to find out.
Yes. You'll have to find out more to find out.
More about Norman's mother.
Yes, learning about her and everything, you just have to kind of watch the film and everything. Yeah, so I guess another aspect that, of course, we always talk about with these films is the horror level and everything. And, you know, it's sort of interesting because I feel like there's just a lot more tension than there is actual horror. But there are definitely horror moments and everything where it's just like, okay, this is like straight horror and everything. And it's a lot of the moments people remember from this film and everything. But it is sort of like this unnerving tension of just being watched because, again, whenever Marion is making all these sort of like mistakes and just trying to rush through and everything, we feel like we're kind of like buckled in. She's the driver, quite literally driving us, and we're also just feeling anxious as well with her. And because that's like one of the great things I like is the fact that everybody stares at her.
Yeah.
It's like been a direct thing, like whenever she saw her boss walking across the street, which in all honesty, I think that actually was something that Tarantino did as a callback for Pulp Fiction. Whenever Marcellus Wallace walks across the street and Bruce Willis is in the car. I can't confirm that, you know, I don't know if it's one of those things where
there are definitely moments like that. Like there's whenever they're walking up to the manor, I guess the house by the motel. And, like every time they do that, and like especially whenever the sister walks up there at one point in the movie, it's like it just reminds me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I just know that Texas Chainsaw Massacre they were emulating that.
It's so funny you said that because I got the exact same vibes and I hadn't even noticed.
Even the layout of the house is like incredibly similar, but
yeah, and it's funny. It's funny too. So again, this obviously was like a clear inspiration and everything. That's funny because I didn't even think about the house as well being such like it could. In all honesty, I wouldn't be surprised if Tobe Hooper did take inspiration from this film. And obviously, this film has impacted a lot of filmmakers, as I mentioned. Another bit about Tarantino, I guess he said his favorite film out of the Psycho franchise is Psycho 2.
Really?
He says but you know, Quentin, he's
a quirky guy.
Yeah, he's this quirky guy, but he says like 2 is I don't want to say this if it isn't true, but I think he said he prefers 2 over 1.
It's crazy because there's some good feet shots in 1, so figured he'd like it.
Oh my god, tangent. I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Have you seen that film yet?
I haven't yet.
You should watch it.
Okay.
Now, all I'll say is you would love it.
A lot of feet.
Yes. You have no freaking idea. That's all I'll say without spoiling anything.
That's not the one. What movie was it that he cast himself to suck Selma Hayek's?
That was From Dusk Till Dawn.
Right.
Yes, yeah. He didn't direct it, but he started it.
Yeah, he's not even hiding it at this point.
No. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of confirms it. So just be prepared for that.
I'm always prepared to see some feet in a
Heck
Tarantino movie.
So, don't toe the line. Okay. Foot jokes aside. Yeah. This film definitely has a lot of moods and everything. And I think another thing that helps sort of establish the moods is the music. The music's good. It's just really,
iconic.
Really freaking good. Yes. And even though you do hear sort of like that theme of Psycho, which I know some people may think it's the you know, which I would argue that, but I'm thinking more of the yes. And it's sort of like it's obviously music, but it's also very brash and everything with the playing. So it also helps build tension. So obviously major kudos goes to Bernard Ehrman, who created the music for it, because that is one of the things I do really appreciate about this film. And anytime I'm like really getting into the Halloween mood, I always throw this one on the playlist and everything, just because it is a good theme and everything. And it does really help to build the tension and everything whenever she is going through it, so it complements it very, very well. Music definitely goes very far whenever it comes to setting up the overall feeling. So I did like that a ton. The use of music I thought was very well done. On a scale of like 1 to 10, how scary would you say this film is?
Scary is an interesting adjective, because I mean, Hitchcock's the master of suspense, and this is a very suspenseful movie, especially if you've never seen it before, because there's a little bit of like a mystery element. What's gonna happen next, you know? I don't think this movie is like super duper poop your pants scary. Especially because, I mean, you got to consider it as a product of the time. They couldn't show that much, like, blood or gore, like, wah. Yeah, I mean, this was the first movie they ever showed a toilet flushing in. So, that's true. You've been lied to if you've heard this is the first movie ever show a toilet. Although that wasn't common either. But this is the first movie you see a toilet flushing. Because just audiences were more sensitive back then.
Yeah, because, like, I think that was... If I remember correctly, that was one of the biggest problems I guess the studio had, was seeing, like, the toilet, you know, flushing there.
Yeah.
Like, that was, like, a big controversy at the time. I even remember, have you ever seen, like, this sort of, like, teaser trailer, like, Hitchcock did with Psycho? Where he tours the house. I will have to send you the video. It's so good, but
I feel like I have seen something where he's
but
in the house.
I love it. Hitchcock has done some wild ass videos. Like, if you have ever seen the Universal Studios sort of like tram tour there, where he's in front of a green screen or something like that. Okay, I was trying to pause it, but this is something where I'm just like, let's see, gotta do that. But while I'm looking this up, okay, yeah, I think I found it here. In the original, like, Psycho, where he's touring the house, I'm trying to get to the bathroom bit. He walks up to this one room, and again, it's like a long way shot, you know, it's like you're on the first floor looking at the second floor there, and he opens the door, and he closes it, and he goes, bathroom. Like, he just does that. He didn't show it there, so that's just what I think. But I gotta show you this commercial here.
And now you'll learn the secrets of the $6 million man and the bionic woman.
How did they do it?
Yeah, so that jumping thing. Fun fact, Steven Spielberg never met Hitchcock, but he wanted to so badly, but Hitchcock refused to see him, only because he was so embarrassed by that Universal Studios ad he did. He's like, I can't be seen by anybody. He was so embarrassed by it, which I heard he was a very peculiar man.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Even, did you ever listen to Bryan Cranston's memoir? I guess, like, Bryan Cranston got a chance to meet him or something. Like, I guess he was helping open the door for him or whatever. And, you know, Bryan Cranston was a big fan and trying to talk about him. He's like, you know, Mr. Hitchcock, I'm a super big fan. And I guess Hitchcock's response to that was, he just did that as he crawled in the car or whatever.
He definitely looks like a guy that says that on a regular basis.
Yeah, so he just did
that.
And I guess Bryan Cranston didn't take it personally or whatever. But I would definitely, I don't know what I would do if I got to meet someone I was a big fan of and they just went like, you know, doing that. It's hysterical. I even heard Bryan Cranston do the voice because I listened to his memoir. It's great. It's super great. Yeah, so bathrooms. So that is very interesting, because it was the flushing of the toilet that was more so the bigger issue there, because again, it was just very taboo at the time because of what it implied.
Yeah, they didn't even show, like, you know, people in the same bed together very often. I mean, like, it was just
Yeah, this film really did push the boundaries of a lot of stuff there. Even the beginning with sort of the scene with Marion and Sam. I mean, it's pretty steamy. Like, it's steamy for the 60s there.
Right.
not kinky, but just steamy
Right,
and everything. And
A lot
that's
of
just
skin for the 60s.
yeah, very much a lot of skin and everything. So I was very surprised with that. And even to have like the shower scene, that's all I'll say about it. Because obviously, if there's one scene this film is known for, it's the shower scene.
Oh, yeah.
Bar none, essentially. But it's like you see like Marion, like, dressed down to her brassiere a lot and everything, which is a very intimate moment. So it is sort of like just pushing those sort of boundaries and everything else like that. So I think that's why it just became such a big phenomena whenever it did debut in theaters and everything. But yeah, another thing that I would argue that really helps set the mood is the setting. And whenever I'm meaning setting, I'm literally talking about the Bates Motel. That is the setting, where you see everything in the motel there, and that house. Every time they show that specific shot there of like the staircase leading up to the house and everything, it's iconic. You just look at it and it's just, I mean, there's a reason why people legitimately recognize the house, as one of the most iconic things. And they still have you could still see it on the Universal Studios tour tram they do in Hollywood there. I don't think it's the original. I think it might have been rebuilt for a different film maybe there, but they still like show it there with like Norman sometimes wandering the premises. So yeah, that's a bucket list item to do one of these days. But yeah, like the setting is gorgeous, and it's like you look at the hotel rooms or like the parlor with all the taxidermy birds and everything, and you even get to explore the Bates house essentially and go to each room and dive in. Which, in all honesty, like I didn't even remember that first time watching it. Which again, I watched it at a very young age, so a lot of stuff was just going over my head and everything. But it's very interesting that they did take its time with the pacing of the film to let you just stew in the ambiance of everything there, because it's not it's so interesting because again the motel and house isn't innately like creepy or whatever. There's nothing like like Texas Chainsaw Massacre where you literally walk in and you're just like, okay, yeah, this place is cursed.
Right. It's just kind of old Victorian. It does look like what would pop up on a Google image if you typed in haunted house.
Yeah, which it's funny that you mentioned that because me being a big Disney dork as I am, whenever they were building Disneyland Paris and they were going to do an adaptation of the Haunted Mansion, they wanted to do something different with the layout because it was going to take place in Frontierland, and the previous two styles of the previous attractions was like a Southern plantation home, and the other one's sort of like a new Gothic sort of European sort of look, and they're in Europe. They need to do something different. So quite literally, I'll show you a picture of the house, which is called Phantom Manor, but it looks pretty gosh darn spot on with the Bates home and everything there. Like
yeah, it does. Yeah.
And it was confirmed by Imagineers they did take a lot of inspiration from that. They're sort of like that new Victorian style and everything. So
those just sort of have their place in like spooky culture because if I remember correctly, the TLDR is a lot of these big fancy Victorian era houses were built in like the late 1800s when people were doing oil rush shit, and then like they'd go to a town and dig up all the gold or find all the oil or whatever, and everything would be they'd turn into a ghost town, and then these places would be left to be abandoned. So there's just these spots, especially in the era like the 60s, where this would be being filmed, where there's just these sort of things that used to be symbols of like opulence and are now deteriorating and just look like haunted mansions.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I did not know about that, but that makes a whole lot of sense there. I like that. I was curious. I don't know if this is going to dive into spoilers, because this is like one of those things that I'm not sure how many motifs are in the film, but I know one of them is birds. Birds being a big motif there. And do you think there was a specific reason? I know they talked a little bit about the birds, but I don't know if talking about that's going to spoil everything.
There is one reason that could be a spoiler that I guess I won't. Should I say it or not?
I guess we're getting close to talking about spoilers, so I'll bring back the bird.
I'm not going to full spoil it, but like I feel like you could piece this together if you were willing to. He has a hobby for stuffing these birds specifically, and I think he mentions the expensive chemicals in preserving And that's probably his motivation for picking up the hobby to begin with. And I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
There's a reason why he would want preservative chemicals.
Yes, for sure. And I do love that conversation between Marion and Norman whenever they're talking in the parlor surrounded by all those taxidermy birds, and he sort of talks about his sort of like passion that, you know, led into it and everything there.
Yeah.
So
I think the other part is that conversation where he talks about how he doesn't stuff anything but birds because birds are passive and they're just like beautiful little things. And I think that also sort of slips into what he might be attracted to in a victim. But
yes, very true. Man, trying to think, aside from that, is there anything else we should probably talk about this film before spoilers?
Boy howdy. No, I mean I feel like we've been doing a lot of tiptoeing. I'm ready to dive in.
Yeah. You're ready to grab the shower curtain and everything. Yes, doing that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll let you go ahead and give your rating for Psycho here real quick.
Psycho, man. I'm a Hitchcock fan. I mean, I haven't watched every single little thing he's done, but I'm a fan of pretty much every movie I've seen that he has made, and this is no exception. It's a great movie. It's iconic. It is, there are movies that I was selecting out to be put in the Museum of Cinema. This would be one of them. It is a fantastic movie. I am not going to give it a perfect 10 out of 10 because I do think there are some spots that are just unnecessarily slow paced. There's like a cleanup scene that's just like
my god, you make me feel so much better.
There's like no need for it to take that long or to focus in on every little detail. And like there are things you can make. There's like a lot of things I can be nitpicky about, like should they really, should they? But like all those things you can make arguments for. I think this is the one that's like a little, I don't want to say indefensible, but it is just like, bro, there's no reason to like to hang on that scene for that long. There's like a couple, and like there's a lot of slow pacing things that are like, well, okay, this is a suspense film, it's building suspense, it's building the mystery, whatever. That scene in particular, and there's a couple others that just kind of go too long. But really, that's my only gripe with the movie. It's a fantastic film. It is aged fantastically well, and should be held high in the annals of history or whatever. So this is a 9 out of 10 for me. It's a great film. It's almost perfection. In many ways, it is perfection, but I'm holding it back from a perfect 10 for some issues of maybe it's just that maybe that is how it's aged poorly, is that it's paced so much slower for the iPad audience. But I like a slow burn film every now and then, but it's just there's no reason for a lot of things that they were showing that could have been wrapped up.
Man, that is funny because, like I said, I was thinking about that scene as well, like how long it took in the shower or whatever. Because I was thinking, like, am I just being like overly nitpicky with this? Sort of. Like just trying to find anything wrong with it. And no, there's definitely some parts where I did sort of just like, okay, you can hurry up there. And I don't know if, again, it's sort of my attention span just used to like, okay, we get it. Or if it took so long because it was showing audiences like, okay, here's what you do in a situation like this.
Yeah.
That's about the only thing I could think of there.
Maybe that kind of thing had just never been shown before on film, and I'm not appreciating that enough or something. I don't know, but it's it was really boring.
Yeah,
those parts where it's like, okay, I get it. Let's go to the next part, and okay, we're still here. There's multiple moments. That's just like the biggest one that stands out to me is that cleanup scene.
Yeah, and like there's other moments as well, which we'll sort of like dissect and see kind of how we stand whenever it comes to certain moments. But I'm pretty much with you as well. Like I thought about giving it a 9.5, but I'm still like, that's kind of where I buffed up Frankenstein during our review and everything. I gave it a 9, but then I was thinking more, I'm like, no, 9.5, gotta amp it up a little bit. So I think like a 9 is like more than deserving of this film. Still deserves to be respected and lauded and everything else. So even though it's a 9 out of 10, that's still nothing to sneeze at there. Like, again, for context, Aaron and I have only rated 2 films each a 10 out of 10
Yeah.
on this entire podcast, where we're on episode like 70 and everything. So
Mhm.
it's still definitely in the upper echelon, and it does deserve to be recognized and preserved. Like, literally, as Aaron said, it deserves to be like in the Hall of Fame, or whenever it comes to films in general, not even horror films. But yeah, 9.9's exactly where I'm at as well. I thought about giving it 9.5. The more I kind of stew on it, I'm just like, nah, I gotta keep it at a 9 there, essentially, but still very good. So, for people that haven't seen it, you probably should just go watch it. You know, it's a good Mother's Day flick, you know.
Sure.
Very much a driving motivation behind this film and everything.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean that facetiously, you know, watching for Mother's Day, but you should watch it. It's just that good of a film, and quite honestly. So, yeah. So, for people that want to stick around because they know exactly the main beats of this film, please stick around. But if you don't want to be spoiled, yeah, you best cut it off here, essentially. Aaron.
Yeah.
So why, even though I know exactly what you're talking about, why is the taxidermy bird thing so goddamn important?
Oh, yes, I'm glad you asked. Well, you know, he has been using those same preservative chemicals that he's been using on the birds to preserve his mother's corpse for the past 10 years. That is sitting in the fruit cellar when we see it, but mostly sitting upstairs in the window.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that whenever I watched it, whenever I was younger, you know, there is like some sort of like shocking sort of stuff there, but I do feel like it is sort of good entry level horror there. Like, it's definitely sort of tests a bridge there. Like, I would rather show somebody this before I showed them Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even though like Texas Chainsaw doesn't have as much, like, it's more implied and stuff. You don't actually see a lot of stuff. But I remember specifically as a little kid definitely being creeped out whenever Marion's sister is down in the fruit cellar and the body turns around and there's like those hollowed out eyes, which already I'm weird with eye stuff there. So just seeing that, it didn't scare me horrifically as a child, but definitely bothered me to where I still have that sort of patch in my memory. Every time I see it, I remember that initial fear I had.
It's just such a great and stark image to save for the twist or whatever. And I even love how it comes up like later. I say later. There's not much film after you see the mother's corpse, but whenever they do like a fade away on Norman's face, and then they overimpose the skull for like a second.
That's always stuck with me because there was something about that scene that always bothered me, but I never knew it was because that face appeared again. And so it was like almost like subliminal sort of messaging bothering me. But obviously I know they did that just because, again, it's sort of like the mother taking over Norman, essentially.
Right.
And I'm going to be honest, like, obviously this is the biggest twist of the film, is essentially like, not only is Norman Mother's dead, but Norman's been his mother the entire time,
pretending to be dressing up as her, and he's been the one that's killing people.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, like, looking at it, even though I watched the film knowing, like, yes, Norman Bates is the killer, you know, he's pretending to be his mother, you know, killing everybody, everything else like that, still watching it, if you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
But it doesn't also feel cheap otherwise there.
Right.
Like, you know, because I think that was like the biggest thing about this film, is the fact that this wasn't a normal thing that a lot of films did, and that's why they literally have to spend the last 5 minutes bringing in a psychologist character to break down
to
exactly
explain it all.
Yes, because like at the time this was not like a common thing there, as much as we're aware of sort of mental illnesses now and everything like that. So
and the way that it's set up, I feel like, is really, really good, because at no point does Norman say like, I'm mentally ill or whatever, but he talks a lot about his mother's mental illness or whatever in that scene where they're in the parlor, and then to the point where, you know, Marianne is then like, why don't you put her in a place or whatever. He's like, one of those places, I've seen the inside of those, you know, and then it's like, well, why have you seen the inside? Why would you know it? Or because he's also a little mentally disturbed.
Yeah,
you know
but it's like one of those things as well, like, you know, you could also just infer, like, you know, like other people have talked to him or whatever, and he's sort of like taking his own interpretation there, you know, sort of like, you know, like, oh, I'm not going to one of those places.
One
There's
of those
like
loony bins?
Yes, exactly. And so it's really done masterfully. Like, even though I knew what it was, and every time I heard, Norma's voice and everything, that's the name of his mother. I knew it was just him talking to himself, or like dragging the corpse around and everything. It's still done so convincingly and everything. So where I'm like genuinely curious how many people would catch on to the twist if they genuinely had no idea nowadays. I know back in the 60s, like I said, it was just very much a newer thing for it to do. And I do feel like they do. I mean, I don't pretend to be like sort of like a figure whenever it comes to recognizing whether like people are portraying mental illness as offensive or something like that. But for me, it looked like it was done fairly respectively. Respectfully, and even like the exposition the psychologist gives at the end, it doesn't feel like pandering, like, okay, here's explaining it. It's like they're almost explaining it to, again, the characters, because the characters are also unaware of this sort of mental illness sort of going on with like dissociative personality disorder, I think it's called now. I think so. And they explain it in such a way, too, that it does make it interesting for people that do understand. So, and I do think it was important for them to explain that aspect clearly, because if they didn't, it just would have been like, the hell's that about?
I even think they handled, for the 60s, it was really funny that, like, probably the one part that maybe didn't age as well as the rest of the film is when the cop is, like, dressed up as his own mother? Is he a transvestite?
Yeah!
But even that, the psychologist was like, no, not exactly. Like, let me explain. A transvestite is this, you see, but then he is just trying to embody the aspect of his mother, blah, blah.
Yes.
Yeah, so, like, even stuff like that, I feel like to the 60s, I was like, they explain pretty well. But.
Yeah, I was genuinely surprised, considering a lot of 80s films, it's just quick to call someone a faggot.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so, like, considering this is done very tastefully for the 60s is a wonder.
Right. Yeah, like pre-civil rights movement 60s, they probably just like mowed down a whole group of minorities with their car on the way to the studio to shoot this film. Alfred Hitchcock himself personally. But then they handled that with tact, so I appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so that's done very well. And again, like, that's sort of like the interesting thing about it, because like they dive into like every aspect of like why, especially Norman would feel inclined to kill people, because obviously he kills, like, I think technically, is it just 2 people in the film
that we see? In the film itself, yeah, the characters that we're introduced to, it's just 2.
Yeah, but he's killed like 2 others.
Yeah,
yes,
because there's 2 other missing women or whatever that the psychologist
doing that, but just explaining like why he would kill. Granted,
and then he also killed his mother and their lover. So I mean that's 6 total.
Which that's sort of like the interesting thing about it or whatever, because like it's sort of like, oh, surprise, and that's sort of like the interesting thing, because there's not ever really a point where it's just like, boom, like the only time there's ever the boom moment is whenever you see not only the dead body of Norma Bates, but seeing Norman also run in with the wig, the dress, and the knife and everything, because even there's like big hints given away about what's happening, because whenever Lila and Sam go to the sheriff's office, because there's just like the private investigator hasn't come back. Something bad has happened, and they're talking to him about Norman Bates and stuff, and seeing the mother, it's just like, that's impossible. She's been dead for 10 years. I don't know who you saw, but it can't be her.
Right.
Essentially, and so then ends up being like, well, is he collaborating with somebody and everything?
Right.
Because that's like sort of the interesting thing about the motivation on why Norman is killing everybody, because the money's thrown in the mix as well, so that's almost like a red herring for the audience,
right,
as well, because again, they're not thinking like, oh, this is a deep psychological reason why Norman's killing, as opposed to, oh, sees a lot of money and kills for that. And so I think that's, Hitchcock just loves sort of throwing out these red herrings and stuff to
I guess
keep.
so. Well, I mean, you do see him specifically grab the money, not realize what it is, and put it in the trunk, and then sink the car. So you know he's not hoarding the money because he's not aware of it. But,
Yes,
but it is for like the investigators and the sister and all
yes,
these
that's
people.
mostly...
They're like, what? Who is? So like the audience knows, kind of like, all right, either this mom or Norman or whatever killed these people, but. Yeah, the people on the screen don't know.
Yeah, because it looks like from the audience's point of view, Norman is just trying to cover up for his mom.
Yeah.
But that's just sort of like the interesting thing. You never quite know exactly where Norman's head's at, whether he's just like, oh no, mother's killed again, or if he's actually just loves being in on it,
Right.
He's
Well,
just very tight-lipped.
he does look like shocked whenever he discovers the body of Marion in the shower.
That's true, yeah.
And that whole cleanup scene is just, I think, what it's supposed to portray. Though I think it deals with it with way too much time.
Yes.
But is him seeing it and he'd be like, oh my god, and then he just has to be like, okay, well, I've got to go to work and clean up the whole place or whatever. Which we didn't have to see him mop every spot.
Yeah, it definitely was dragged on for a long period of time.
I understand the motivation because they're like, we want to show him clean everything. So whenever the boyfriend and her sister comes later and they look through the place, it's like they didn't find anything except for this little piece of paper. But even that scene where they're digging through everything was too much.
That's what I thought too.
This stuff can be condensed. I mean, we don't have to see every step that they take to look through this place.
And one of the surprising things, obviously, I think one of the things we do have to talk about is the main shower scene and everything.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's iconic for a reason and everything. And it was one of those... I had just such a weird moment with it and everything because, like, watching it and then getting to that... seeing the big moment and everything of the scene. It's one of those things that I'm like, yeah, I agree, it was masterful, but also I just noticed, a lot more of the just sort of how messy it was and everything.
Yeah, it's a lot of
just
jump cuts slapped together because they can't show a lot.
Yeah, they can't show actual stabbing and everything, and so they have to sort of like imply it, but it was one of those things where it was so jarring or whatever, and even though I should be wrapped up in the suspense, I ended up just sort of like laughing at it because it's sort of like slow knife slashes, because obviously they have to be very careful not to actually hurt anybody there whatsoever. So while I feel like the film is shot the best they could have shot it there, that's one of the scenes where I'm like, the specific stabbing, I'm like, it hasn't aged very well. Now, granted, there are some shots they do there that I'm like, that looks good. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest things people remember is obviously whenever they see the silhouette of someone approaching the shower, which is Norman dressed up as his mother, but you don't see it. And that's really well done because it's so quick, but it doesn't feel like cheaping out to where you're like, I can't even see who it is.
Right.
So that was like the good thing. But whenever it comes to the blood draining on the toilet, like, I mean, toilet, Lord, blood draining down the tub, that looked really good.
Yeah.
And even though, obviously, you probably noticed it's chocolate syrup, and everything, because they needed something thick, and, the red didn't show up well on black and white film, so they had to go darker. But the blood looks really good draining down, like, and they got those shots really well done and everything. And a fun fact, I guess they had trouble shooting that scene because I guess like Anthony Perkins just had a hard time being very menacing with the knife or whatever, and so I guess Alfred Hitchcock got so pissed off, he's like, fine, I'll do it myself. And like, I guess Janet Leigh literally thought Alfred was going to stab her. So like, there's some genuine like scream moments. Now granted, I'm sure they mixed it in with a lot of the softer moments there, but they just needed that initial scream and sort of fear there. So, there's your fun fact for that. But I mean, it is iconic for a reason and everything, despite how goofy or maybe not well aged it is. It's the equivalent of seeing the body in Frankenstein fall on the windmill there. Like, it looks really bad and everything, but
you know what's going on.
Yes, you get what's implied. So that's why I don't like hammer it too hard there, but that was a moment where I'm like, man, that took me out of it.
Yeah.
Just sort of like the slow, like moving hand with the knife there.
Well, even the stabbing later, whenever he stabs the private investigator. That is also a really goofy scene.
Oh yes, that one was also a doozy there, because the idea is like whenever the private investigator is going to the house or whatever, he's like going up the stairs, and he's heading towards a room that we know that the mother's in, and I do. It's so bad because they do something like really cool and epic with the shot, like they did the shower scene and everything, where I'm like, oh, masterful, perfect, cinema masterpiece.
Right.
And then follow it up with the most goofy ass thing you've ever seen, because the genius way they have it is they have like an above head shot of the stairwell and like the little like hallway that connects to the bedroom, and you just see an above head shot, so you only see like the top of Norman's wig and a dress, so again it's not revealing who it is,
right,
sort of stabbing. But then they just have sort of this thing where I'm guessing he's the private investigator is in front of a green screen, and he's like waving his arms like he's falling backwards and
falling back down the stairs.
Yes, for sure. But it's just funny because of how smooth the transition is. He does not tumble at all. It's sort of like it was like a slide almost.
Yeah,
where he's like,
he just hovers backwards down the stairs,
and then it's only towards like the last few steps where he tumbles on the ground. And so that was just like, woo, that did not age well, Alfred. And I'm sure at the time they did the best they could or whatever, not using stuntmen as heavily, but it was still like, and I'm sure he wanted like a specific shot of like the horror, because again, he like just got like stabbed, like slashed across the face there as he's falling there. But yeah, that's a rough one.
yeah. I mean, I assume it's a challenge not only to do that kind of special effects back then, but in black and white film, but it's also like, you can't show the mother's face at all because that would ruin the surprise. So like you're limited on your angles. And in the case of the shower scene, you also can't show any nudity because that would be faux pas for this era. So it's just like you're dealing with a lot of can't use that. So I like it's like understandable, but yeah, it is jarring to watch.
Yeah,
you're just like, that's good.
Oh yeah. Also, another fun fact about the shower scene I just remembered. Whenever they showed the film, at the very least, whenever Alfred, I believe, was like having the first showing, he requested that theater people do not let people in like after a certain amount of time. So it's like if they missed like getting to the movie on time or whatever, they were just locked out. Because the problem is the entire marketing thing was like Janet Leigh starring in Psycho,
right? And
that was like the main pull. And so the last thing he wanted was for people to arrive in the middle of the movie, be like, where's Janet Leigh? Where's Janet?
Which is what I was referencing in the beginning when I said the narrative structure is really interesting, because it's a big risk to make a movie, introduce your main character, and it's like the only character that's developed, and then 30 minutes into it just kill him off. And then you have to follow completely new protagonists, and it's like,
and like that's sort of the ingenuity, because it does work.
It works.
It genuinely does work. It doesn't feel like, well, hell, what's going to happen now or whatever. It just naturally picks up with Sam, her sister, just trying to figure out like, yeah, we haven't found Marion anywhere. She's like been gone for a while. And like her boss isn't wanting to make this a big search, because he wants to keep it low, because he's like, she's worked for me for 10 years and everything. I did think it was, speaking of which, I did think it was a very interesting choice anytime Marion was seen driving, where it sort of like played voices in the background of like, I guess what the people were actually saying while she's gone.
I think it's what she was imagining.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Makes sense. It's all like sort of in her head, like, oh, what will they say or whatever.
Right. Because the first time that happens, she's imagining what her boyfriend's going to say when she gets there, what Sam's going to say, because she's like, oh, you drove all the way up here to see me? Well, of course, I'm always happy to see you, but why are you here? Or whatever. Like that was like the first voice line.
I forgot about that.
And of course, obviously, she never actually meets up with him, so because she dies. But so I think all the other things are just like she's worried and nervous, and like that's what the cops are saying. That's what the boss is saying. That's what that old millionaire guy is saying, or whatever.
Yeah, that does make sense. But yeah, that's That's one of the weird things about it, because like the plot does naturally pick up because it is focusing on Marion with the $400,000, but then she gets entangled
40,000.
in 40,000.
Inflation's a
Sorry,
bitch.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, my bad. Let me just pull it back. $40,000.
I do want to look up. You
Yeah,
go. I want to see what
because
that
it
would
takes
be.
it takes place in 1950, I think, because the
Okay.
card said 51, I think maybe.
Well, the one of the cars she bought in the corner, it said like 56 or something. I think.
Yeah,
so.
I can't remember when it takes place, but it's in that period. I just remember I can't remember if it was like 57 or 51. I just know it was a line there, but yeah. Speaking of which, I do love that car shopping scene, because it's like after she deals with the cop there, and she's like having to lie, and the cop's like, okay, you're completely fishy, completely. I'm gonna follow you and see what's up. And she's just committed to the bit of finding a new car. How much?
So $1 in 1960 is worth $10.55 today. So roughly, we could say, yeah, you would actually be about right. A little over $400,000.
Jeez Louise on my knees. Yeah, that's a lot of dough.
No.
Yeah.
$450,000.
But yeah, I do love that car shopping scene because it's tense the entire time. She's very much in a hurry, and this salesman is like great. Like the little bit of screen time he has, he makes it count. He's just like, he's quite literally like a salesman, where he's making like a lot of the same kind of like goofs and gaffes that a lot of salespeople do just to kind of break down the barrier. But I love that scene for like a multitude of reasons, because she's just like, yeah, I just don't want this car, just something new. And he's just like, okay, yeah, I understand. It's just like, yeah, why don't you take a look around there? And she's like, I want this car. And it's like, perfect. Yeah. Like, how about you take it for a test spin? No, let's just buy it now. He's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think he has a great line where he's like, I've never had a customer pressure a salesman.
Yeah, he said like, must be the first time the customer's ever pressured the salesman.
Yes, doing that, because it's just, she makes it so perfectly awkward, because the policeman is just staring at a distance, but she's still committed to the bit. She's like, I'm getting this new car, even though they literally see me getting the new car, and is in a hurry essentially. And then he's like, with your car it would be like $700 extra, and he's like, if you need time, he's like, no, I'll get the money. And he's like, what?
Yeah, he's like, okay.
Yeah, he's just like,
well, because she starts thinking, he goes, and she's like, yeah, there's always time to think when money's involved, or whatever. And she's like, no, I'll do it. And he's like, you sure?
Yeah, like quite literally just surprised all around.
Don't want a day to think it over.
Yeah, and then I just love how like whenever the mechanic's like, hey lady, you're forgetting your bags, whenever she tries driving off, and it just literally leaves the policeman, the salesman, the mechanic just staring at her, just like, the hell was that?
Yeah. She's like, just throw it in the bag, and then he drives off.
But yeah, that was interesting as well, seeing that good old nice car end up being submerged in the swamp. Yeah. Must be very nice having that swamp for dumping bodies.
At the end, they show it getting pulled out. So
yes, yeah, I thought that was like a very interesting way for it to end the film, as opposed to ending on. Because I think that's the thing people remember more is the Norman Bates slowly looking up at the camera and smiling, but they end with the car being pulled out.
Right, with the words "the end" over it.
Yeah, so I'm very curious as to why they chose to end with the car as opposed to Norman. I feel like that was just a weird decision. Like, I guess to show like, yep, they found the car.
Yeah, they found her body in the swamp behind it.
Like, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess, but they had already mentioned like that they had found the bodies or whatever. Yeah. So I don't know. It's definitely an odd choice there overall, but I do love a lot of the scenes, and they do have a lot of like impressive moments there. Like I made a joke with you that they loved using the rear mirror essentially there, like twice there, which essentially is just literally like two shots over one there. And this is so stupid of me that I got excited about it, but I loved how whenever it was raining heavily, that whenever he gets rid of the body, that everything is still wet.
Yeah.
Or whatever, because I feel like a lot of times that ends up being an oversight where it's like, oh yeah, we'll have a lot of rain, but you know how production is or whatever. They'll shoot the next day and everything's bone dry there, but it's supposed to take place the same night. So I did love seeing like the car have sort of like raindrops on it, or like the ground being as muddy as it is. I do think it's funny because there was a genuine sort of like laughing moment there whenever Norman's pushing the car into the swamp there and it starts sinking, and I just made a joke and I'm like, what's it going to do if it stops halfway through? And then it stops halfway through, which I had forgotten.
Yeah.
And it was funny because Norman, you know, was just smiling at the success of, like, I got rid of the body. But then when it stops, his, like, smile goes away. He's just staring at it. And then it's just, like, a long stare. And then it goes, it, like, sinks back down. It's such a goofy moment and everything. But it's so funny there. Yeah, it just hits a vibe, a mood, and one of the things that I do find super funny that I mentioned to you several times, Aaron, is how much Norman fumbles at lying and trying to come up with this good alibi there.
He's like already not good at talking to people, so now he's in trouble and people are asking him things. So I love the way it's acted out, where he's like, no, that didn't happen. Or like the guy's coming in and he's like, did she take any phone calls? No. He's like, how would you know if you weren't with her or whatever? And he's like,
yeah,
maybe she did. I don't know. She was tired.
Doing that sort of thing, yeah. And I think it's great because, again, anytime we see oh, he's actually a killer or whatever, it's usually end up being like super duper creepy, or a guy who has Riz who's able to lie his way through anything at all. So I like just seeing him fumble, but again, people just end up just being like, yeah, okay, you're definitely up to something. I can't prove it, though, or anything like that. Because I do love how much the filmmakers trick both the characters and the audience watching about, like, the mother-son dynamic. Because literally, like, Norman will prop the body up in front of the window, or sometimes be dressed up as her there walking around and, you know, having conversations back and forth. And I do love the sort of suspense build up there, especially looking at the bed and seeing that there's like an indentation of a body that looks like it's laid there for a while there, but it's not just clear about it. It's like, oh, this is clearly a dead body, because whenever Lila is figuring out everything, it's just really good moments like that, I think, really helps solidify the film. But again, it is taken a little bit away. Especially, I will say, the resolution is wrapped up pretty quickly, because as great of an entrance as it is, Norman coming down and getting ready to stab and everything, Lila.
After she hits the lions, weaving back and forth.
Oh, yes. It's so good. And then Sam just puts him in a chokehold, I guess, and Norman is just easily subdued there. And I was just like, well, that was easy. Sort of thing like that. And again, I do have to talk more about that final scene with Norman in the holding cell, essentially, and just hearing, like, you know, Norman's mother's voice speaking there, and that monologue there about, you know, just basically talking about how she's, like, just going to act like she's completely harmless still, essentially.
And blame
there.
it all on her son, you know?
Yes, doing that. That's honestly, like, a great scene, and obviously one of the reasons why I think a lot of people remember this film. Like, it is a very strong final scene to end on and everything.
Which I think plays well with the title of the film, because on a first viewing, you don't know necessarily who the title Psycho is referencing. Is it Norman Bates? Is it his mother? Because you don't know that they're the same person, you know what I mean? So in the beginning, it's like, you know, you think the mother killed him. It's like, oh, that must be the Psycho they're talking about, presumably. But then by the end, you realize not only are they the same, but also your first intuition might have been right, because he thinks he is the mother, and the mother is the Psycho, because she just blamed it all on her son, you know?
Yeah, and something you mentioned that I wanted to bring up, but I couldn't because of spoilers, is the reference to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I got a lot of that vibes, just sort of like a secluded place that's, like, very, again, just sort of deserted and everything, one by one people coming in, and, you know, Norman isn't going out trying to, like, kill people. It's just the fact that people that walk in that ends up...
Yeah, even the shot when the sister is walking up on the hill, they do that slow panning shot behind her as she walks up, and she's all curious and whatever, and it looks like just like whenever the chick with the red shorts is walking up to the house.
Yes!
And they do the sort of low up pan as it goes into a place where she shouldn't be going, suspense thing. It's like almost shot for shot.
Well, and come to think of it, even the entrance, like, the staircase is on the right hand side, and there's that hallway on the left there.
Where you would see Leatherface in the first part.
And not only that, but even leading up to the stairwell, like, whenever Lila and Sam appear there, it shows Norman kind of looking through the window, which, again, almost reminds me of Leatherface whenever he looks out the window after like the second or third person's come through, and he's like, what is going on?
Right.
So it is very interesting, like illusions there and everything going on with that. Because again, Norman isn't going out killing people. It's just people literally coming up. And I do love that a majority of the people that he's killed is sort of like younger, beautiful women. Because again, he just had sort of kind of like a very traumatic childhood growing up there, and to where he ended up just being like very attached to his mother. He even makes like a passing line where he's like, you know, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Right,
you know,
right.
doing
Yeah. Whenever Marianne's like, don't you ever go out with your friends? And he's like, well, the boy's best friend is his mother.
that scene is just great in so many ways, but especially for building up Norman. But it just does make sense because you're given the fact of like early, it's like, oh, you know, his mother was crazy and like, you know, it was a murder suicide, you know, killed her lover and then killed herself. But then it's like revealed later that Norman is the one that killed both of them, just sort of out of a jealous rage and everything, just because of that dependency. But with that guilt setting in and him kind of creating his mother in his own mind there, anytime a beautiful woman would, you know, be seen or whatever, and he has like that sort of like urge there, he just feels like he should be reprimanded and punished. Therefore the mother takes over and kills the woman there, because like that is like, I mean, obviously this is also mentioned in some of the stuff. I know they made a reference to it to The Simpsons, but whenever he's like, you should stay in room 1 because that's next to the office. It's a really nice thing. But really, it's just because he has a peephole there to look through and everything. And the way Anthony Perkins is just able to stare off and everything else like that is just very well done, masterful, because you just see like nothing behind his eyes sometimes. Even though he does have like that awkward tism riz, as you say there, but it's just very well done overall with it, and there's just a lot of stuff to praise this film about and everything.
I would say specifically in that scene where he's talking to Marianne in the room with all the birds, I do love that on a second watch you kind of get what he's talking about when he's talking about being trapped or whatever. He's like, you feel trapped in your situation, and Marianne believes he's like, oh, because he's here with his mother that's oppressive or whatever. But he's talking about like being trapped in the situation that he made, you know, where he killed both his mother and the woman. He's like constantly trying to like the guilt that he holds for killing his mother and becoming his mother, you know, in his own mind. It's like he talks about the traps that people are in, and Marion takes this to be like, you're right, like I've stepped into this trap of I stole this money when I shouldn't have, and I should go back and clear everything up. And she makes that decision to do that in the morning, but doesn't get to follow through on that because little does she know, the third meaning of that conversation is, she stepped into this trap of the Bates Motel. And she's gonna die.
And I think that's definitely a powerful moment whenever she does decide, like, you know what, this is a mistake and I need to owe up to it there. Even though, like, they're both talking about just so many different things. Like, it's so weird that the killer and the victim end up having, like, a very heartfelt talk between the two of them. Like, it genuinely connects. But then it's just cut off short there. Because, again, like, another illusion of Norman being trapped, I feel like, is he's trapped in his own mind, essentially. Right. Because, again, as a psychologist mentioned, the mother is the stronger, dominant one between the two. Therefore, there's just a moment where she just takes over. And I do love that, like, whenever it comes to the voice of Norman, like of Norma, I guess his mom, they did get a female to do the voiceover. And again, they didn't try lip syncing or anything else like that. It's just always off screen anytime you hear the voice, or you can't see his mouth moving at all, which I do think it adds to it. Because again, that's sort of the thing. People with like dissociative personality disorder, there has been instances where the cases can be so strong where they like quite literally physically are able to change their bodies. Not massively, but just enough. So just the fact they actually did have a woman come in to do the voice of Norma, I felt like it's appropriate. Because, and you know, it's not just in his head, him saying that, because whenever they bring a blanket to him in the holding cell there, she says thank you to him and everything. So I feel like it's just very, very powerful choice overall to do that. But there is honestly a lot to be praised about this film and everything, and I'm sure there's I don't know, is there anything else you would want to talk about with this film?
think so.
No, that's kind of how I feel. Like, I feel like we could, like, comb through even more stuff. I just had to
but-
bring up certain allusion points. Like, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I didn't even think even that much heavily about it, so I'm glad you brought it up and that we were both kind of on the same page with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Psycho, we like it. We like it quite a bit there.
We're just crazy about it.
Yes. So, God damn it, Aaron. So we're going to be moving on to the next film, which this film takes place 27 years later in 1987,
Ooh.
and it is a sequel. The third film, in fact,
a third.
talking about a fellow slasher.
Halloween 3?
No, but yeah. No, we already watched Halloween 3. I just realized.
Oh, yeah. That's a
No,
Jamie Lee on the brain.
No. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, think of somebody that has a couple of more knives on his hand.
Good old Freddy.
Yep, it is Nightmare on Elm Street 3 coming up. So figured it's honestly been a while since we've reviewed the second one.
Yeah, it's been
and so I felt like it was just time to revisit Fred to see how the old chap's doing and everything. Yeah. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you all again next time when we're popping the scary with A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Dream Warriors. I was saving that big reveal for the end. I couldn't just drop it off willy-nilly, you know me.
Dream Warriors.
Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're popping the scary.